Hello and welcome back. I promised that you would get to see my obnoxiously wonderful Victorian underwear, and this is part of it. I lovingly call it my circus tent because I am not a large person. Normally, when you fold underwear, I can fit it in the palm of my hand. There's no way that this monstrosity is ever going to fit in the palm of my hand. As I was cutting it out, I actually thought I had made a mistake, but no, their dainties just were not very dainty. Today I'm actually going to be putting a buttonhole in, and to put in the buttonhole I need to do what is called a whip stitch and also a buttonhole stitch. So I'll be showing you both of those stitches. They are both also basic stitches that everybody ends up knowing eventually, for the most part. But I will also be showing you how to measure and set the buttonhole, and I will actually be completing a buttonhole for you so you can see how they're actually used. Now I do have my button here, and the first thing you do is you figure out where the buttonhole needs to be placed. When it's buttoned, I would like the button to sit approximately there, give or take. That looks about right. You don't want it too close to the edge. You don't want it too far back. You want it so there's a little bit of a lap here. So to be able to mark that, you don't want to mark the edge here. And this is just tailor's chalk. I've used things like just pencils. I've used a bar of soap that had a sharp edge to it to mark dark fabrics before. It really just depends on what you have on hand. I really like the tailor's chalk personally. I know people that absolutely dislike it and prefer like the marking pens, the washable marking pens that you can purchase for a few dollars. They tend to dry out on me because I don't use them enough. But I bought a set of, I think it was 10 of these tailor chalks for $5 or $6 off of the evil Amazon, unfortunately, but that's where I found them. So but to be able to mark your buttonhole, since when you button put the button through the buttonhole, the edge of the buttonhole will actually be close to where the holes in the button are, because the threads don't stop at the edge of the button. The threads that actually hold the button in place are back here in the holes. You'll want to kind of eyeball where those holes are and move the button back so that if the holes were here, I'm just going to make a mark by just running the chalk. I should have used a different color chalk. But then you set the holes on that. Oh, that's a little bit too far back. Okay, so let's move that forward a little bit. Let's say there. And then you put the holes approximately on that line, just a little bit back from it. That's closer to where I wanted it to be. Okay. And then you put the edge of the button there, and you give yourself just a little bit of room because it takes a little bit of extra room for the button to go through. And you mark it again. So you have, that one should not be there, excuse the finger, but you have two lines. And then you take a straight edge, and I'm just using a cheap plastic ruler because it's what I had handy, and about midway where you need the button to be, you draw a line across. And that's the marking for your buttonhole. And normally I would set this on a flat surface and then use like an X-Acto knife or something. I do not have a flat surface to put it on. As I said, I do not have a flat surface to put it on, so I'm just going to be very, very careful because I do not want to slice myself open, and I'm going to cut along that center line all the way through all the layers of fabric. I believe there's 4 layers of fabric here, or 5. And just make sure it goes through all of them. There we go. Got through the back side. I keep getting interrupted, so the video is going to be pause and restart a few times. But you cut from along that line from the first marking to the second marking. So you've got the nice little slit there. I have gone ahead and already threaded my needle. I've got this nice, lovely multicolored thread because it amuses me. And I'm going to start with a whip stitch. You see how that's kind of fraying along the edge. The whip stitch helps to hold those extra threads into place, helps to stabilize all of the layers that you can see in there, and so that you get a nice neat buttonhole. It's also something you can kind of see here. I've used it along the edge there to hold that edge together. And this is just the waistband, so it's something that's commonly used for edgings. To do a whip stitch, you go up from underneath, you go through all of the layers, so it's just coming through the hole, or through the slit there, and you don't need to catch much, it's really just the edge. Pull it through, and again with that little technique with the loop on the end of the thread, and put the needle through the loop so that the stitch catches. Boom. And then you continue on, and it's underneath, through the hole, through all the layers, through the hole, through all the layers. And I'm going to continue to do this all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video because I don't think you need to see this 100 times. I think you've pretty much got it. When it gets down to the other end here, I'll go ahead and start again and show you how to go around that corner with a whip stitch. Okay, I've gotten down towards the end of the corner here. You can kind of see where the red started coming in. You can see how that whip stitch works a little bit better. This end is going to be where the button snags and holds, so it tends to be in most buttons that are hand sewn, or buttonholes that are hand sewn, it tends to be a little bit rounded. So to do the whip stitch, the stitch itself is done the same way. You just go from underneath and through, but instead of simply going along the straight line, the sides that are on the opening will be closer together, and you do what's called fanning. So instead of these being fairly consistent, they'll be a little bit further apart. This area of the buttonhole is actually one of the most important to get the stitching correct in, because this is where the fabric and the stitches are going to be under the most stress. It's where the pressure from the button is going to pull against the fabric itself. And you can see as I'm putting them in, they're very close together here and then pulling farther apart here. Now I did miss, because of the way I cut this, I did miss a little bit there. We'll pick that up when we do the buttonhole stitch, because the buttonhole stitch actually is going to go over the top of the whip stitching. So the stitches will be a little bit larger. Also, don't be afraid to do things like turn your work, like I just did. You have to be in a position that's comfortable for you to do the stitch work, or it's just not going to work well. One of the things that I'll be showing you a little bit later on is you can actually kind of see it here along where my fingernail is running there. It looks different from the opposite side, but not by much. And that's what it looks like on the opposite side, and it tacks down the edges of the seam on the inside here. There are actually a couple of ways to do that. I just discovered a couple of weeks ago that I actually do that in the Victorian fashion. Did not realize that I was not doing that in the modern fashion. And the only difference is how you hold your needle and which direction you push the needle through the fabric. It's the exact same stitch, but just a minor stylistic difference. Alright, thread. I'll just snip you out later. Okay, I am on the last whip stitch. So as I pull that through, I'm going to start with the buttonhole stitches. The buttonhole stitch, we're going to start on the same side that we started the whip stitch. Put the needle underneath and come up from behind. Like so. Pull it through. Now I am going to do a very, very small stitch that goes sideways right here. I'm just going to pick up a couple of small threads, just like so. It's not something that most people would do. Oh, and it just pulled through. Maybe I won't. Patooties. Since that didn't work, which is fine, it doesn't always work, what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to go ahead and a couple of threads behind where it comes up. So the thread is coming up right here. So behind that, I'm going to go down into the fabric and then come up through the hole. And that's what it looks like on the back side. It didn't quite catch all the way, so try that again. Straight down, turn the needle in the fabric so it's coming up through the hole. There we go. You can see where the needle is right there. And then instead of laying the thread so that it will lay flat to make a flat stitch, you actually pull the thread over here, and then as you pull the needle through and you make the stitch, no tangles, be nice, good thread. As you make the stitch, you make sure that the thread comes up through that loop so that when you pull it tight, the loop does not go all the way flat. and you end up with a little lip right there. And then very close to that first stitch at that same level, all of these stitches are going to be very close together. You go down through the hole, make sure the needle goes through the loop so that the loop will catch. Pull the thread a little bit taut so you can see, and go ahead and pull your stitch up. That is a basic buttonhole stitch, and you're going to continue to do that all the way around the buttonhole. I'll do a few more. Then I'll go ahead and pause until we get to where this loop is again. I was unfortunately distracted when I got to the rounded end of the buttonhole here, but you can see how close together the stitches on this side and the stitches on this side are, and to go around that loop at the end, it's the same stitch but they're just a little bit further apart, so it makes a nice little fan shape going around the edge there. The little pink one is actually one of the whip stitches that's just showing through. And I've come almost to the end here. I'm going to take just a couple of more to get all the way down to the very end. And when you get down to the end, you're going to have to seal this off somehow. When you're working on hot fashion, haute couture, there are a couple of extra steps to the buttonholes, but the ends work the same way as when you're doing fashion for yourself and you're not looking to be the most fashionable thing imaginable. So you get down to the very end, and on the last stitch, which I'm going to take here, you go through that loop as with all the other ones that you've done, but instead of coming back here where you would normally take the next stitch, I'll do one more. Seems like it needs it. But instead of coming back this direction, you actually put your needle through the other side. So it's on the back side. And then you come up over here. And you just do 3 or 4 loops right there on the end. And that helps to seal it off, and you can pull those fairly tight without any problem. But it's just 3 or 4 loops, one over the top of the other. And then to fasten off the thread, I'll do one more. But to fasten off the thread, you actually do this a little bit differently than you do doing either a straight stitch or a back stitch. Like I said, I'm going to turn it to the back here. Now the stitches are a little harder to see on the back. I had some minor issues snagging the thread there, but you take the needle and go underneath the stitches one way. And I tend to go through more than I probably should, but I'd rather have it secured than not. Thimbles are your friends. So you pull it through one direction, then you take it back the other direction. Now you go over the top of a couple of stitches. Take it back the other direction. Ow, I just stabbed myself. I'm not bleeding, it's not that bad. And then once more you go over the top of a couple of stitches and back one last time. So you kind of zigzag through the stitches that you've made for the buttonhole. And that will secure the end of that thread nicely. Just going to leave that there for a moment. And right up next to the stitch, pink. Both threads. Thank you. And you've got a nice buttonhole. Now this is the button that I'm going to attach to the other side, and as you can see, it's just about the right size for it to slip through. And again going the other direction. So that's how you do a buttonhole, and again, that is the whip stitch and the buttonhole stitch to be able to get that done. I again encourage you to try, keep practicing. It takes literally hundreds of buttonholes to be able to do them even this well. This is a little bit sloppy for me, but it's underwear, so I don't care. I encourage you to try. Tag me on your Instagram photos. Let me know. Let me see what you're doing. I'd like to get an eyeball for it, and I'd like to encourage you. So tag me a little bit. Make sure everybody sees it.